It all began with a late-night post that quickly spiraled across social media. Former President Donald Trump, known for his unapologetic and often controversial online presence, had taken aim at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in a way that many called deeply offensive, even dangerous. The post wasn't just political critique, it was personal, filled with loaded language and a photoshopped image that drew instant backlash. The image in question depicted Crockett in a distorted, exaggerated manner, meant to ridicule her appearance. But it wasn't just the image that raised alarm. The accompanying text took it a step further, using language that, according to Crockett's legal team, carried racially coded undertones. In the post, he referred to her in ways that many interpreted as invoking old, harmful stereotypes, ones long used to demean and marginalize black women in public life. Almost immediately, the reactions started pouring in. On Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, users were quick to call out the post as racist, dehumanizing, and dangerous. Several civil rights activists and political figures posted in support of Crockett, pointing out that while criticism of elected officials is part of political discourse, this was something else entirely. Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas, known for her bold voice and sharp questioning in House committee hearings, didn't react publicly right away. According to insiders from her team, she was initially furious but methodical. She took time to speak with her advisors, discuss the legal implications, and weigh her response carefully. Privately, she was concerned not just about her own dignity, but about the broader message such a post sent to women of color in public service. This is the kind of rhetoric that's designed not just to insult, but to silence, one staffer said, describing the mood in Crockett's office that day, and she wasn't going to let that happen. What made the post especially troubling to many was its viral spread. Within hours, it had been shared by thousands of accounts, picked up by conservative media outlets, and turned into memes that continued the attack. For Crockett, the consequences were not limited to public mockery. She reportedly received a spike in hostile messages, some anonymous, others more direct. According to her attorneys, the post sparked a series of threatening emails and phone calls, many of which referenced the original message directly. Legal experts say this kind of online targeting is becoming more common, especially for women in Congress. But Crockett's situation struck a deeper nerve. A Harvard law professor who commented on the case remarked that while public figures are fair game for criticism, there's a line where commentary becomes defamatory, especially when it includes false claims or racially charged rhetoric that fuels harassment. Crockett's defenders argued that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern. The post didn't appear out of nowhere. It followed weeks of heated back and forth between the former president and several progressive lawmakers, particularly women of color. In her view, this was part of a strategy to undermine and intimidate political opponents who represented a new and more diverse generation of leadership in Washington. What especially troubled her, sources said, was the way the post seemed calculated to provoke not debate, but anger. It wasn't about policy differences or legislative disagreements. It was about creating a spectacle, demeaning her character, and unleashing a wave of online harassment that felt both deeply personal and politically motivated. Rather than retreat or ignore it, Crockett began documenting everything. She instructed her staff to archive the post, collect screenshots, and track the reactions and threats that followed. Behind the scenes, her legal team quietly began assembling what they believed was a solid case for defamation and emotional harm. They weren't just looking to make a statement, they wanted accountability. In private conversations, she reportedly said that the post crossed a line not just ethically, but legally. She knew that defamation cases involving public figures were notoriously difficult to win. But to her, this wasn't just about winning a case, it was about pushing back against a kind of political bullying that had become all too common. The lawsuit came swiftly, an unmistakable signal that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had no intention of letting the post fade quietly into the background. Within 48 hours of Donald Trump's inflammatory message going viral, Crockett's legal team filed a formal defamation lawsuit seeking $100 million in damages. The filing, submitted in a federal district court, outlined a comprehensive and calculated response to what Crockett called a deliberate act of malicious character assassination. Her team didn't mince words. The complaint described the post as a direct attack, not just on Crockett as a public persona, but on her safety, her integrity, and her future as a lawmaker. It pointed out that while political figures expect criticism, there are legal boundaries, lines that can't be crossed. According to the filing, Trump had not only crossed that line, but had obliterated it, in a manner that was both reckless and harmful. In legal terms, the lawsuit focused on defamation per se, a category of defamation so egregious that damage is presumed, particularly when it includes false statements that harm someone's reputation or incite public hatred. Crockett's lawyers argued that the post's racially charged imagery and language constituted not only defamation but intentional infliction of emotional distress. They cited a pattern of Trump's prior communications and pointed out that the content targeting Crockett had led to a documented increase in threats against her within hours of being posted. Legal scholars who reviewed the complaint noted how meticulously it had been crafted. It wasn't a publicity stunt or a vague attempt at political point scoring. It was a carefully structured legal maneuver. The lawsuit cited historical precedent, digital communications law, and recent cases involving online harassment of public officials. Crockett's legal team even referenced threats she had received in the days following the post, many of which included racist slurs and direct references to the original message Trump had published. In a press statement following the filing, Crockett stood beside her legal counsel and briefly addressed reporters. She didn't speak with outrage or bluster. Instead, she used calm, precise language that made it clear this wasn't about political theater. I represent the people of Texas with pride, and I will not allow myself to be degraded, humiliated, or endangered by a man who has made a career out of belittling women of color, she said. This is about accountability, and it's long overdue. The lawsuit didn't just seek financial damages, it demanded a retraction and public apology, something many legal observers considered unlikely from Trump, given his history. Still, the filing included the demand as a way to show that the lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about correcting the record and establishing a standard for discourse between public officials. Unsurprisingly, Trump's camp responded with swift denial. A spokesperson for the former president called the lawsuit frivolous, politically motivated, and a clear attempt to suppress free speech. They dismissed the accusations of defamation and insisted that the post was protected under the First Amendment. But Crockett's legal team anticipated this defense. In the court filing, they emphasized the difference between opinion and false, defamatory statements. They argued that the post was not a general critique or satire, but a targeted and false portrayal that had already led to demonstrable harm. Several digital forensics experts were enlisted to provide testimony showing how the post triggered a coordinated response online, leading to a cascade of threats and harassment specifically tied to Trump's message. Meanwhile, reactions from Capitol Hill were mixed but telling. Several Democratic lawmakers publicly supported Crockett's decision, framing it as a bold step in confronting a long-standing pattern of racial and gender-based attacks from the former president. There comes a point where you stop tolerating abuse and start demanding justice, said one member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Privately, even some Republican aides acknowledged the post had gone too far, though few said so publicly. Political insiders whispered about how the lawsuit could reshape the boundaries of acceptable online conduct among elected officials. If Crockett succeeded, it could open the door for more lawsuits, challenging toxic and defamatory political rhetoric on social media. As the legal proceedings began to unfold, Crockett continued her work in Congress, but now, with an added spotlight, her case wasn't just about her anymore. It had become a legal test for where free speech ends and defamation begins, especially in a political climate where words can travel faster than facts, and the damage they cause can linger long after the post is deleted. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through political and legal circles, sparking a flurry of commentary from all sides of the aisle. Within hours of Jasmine Crockett's legal team filing the $100 million defamation suit, news outlets across the country picked up the story, fueling debates not only on talk shows and social media, but within the halls of Congress itself. The central question wasn't just whether she could win, but what it meant that she had filed it in the first place. On progressive networks, commentators praised Crockett's decision as long overdue. One cable host described the lawsuit as a clear act of courage in the face of calculated cruelty, while another called it a direct challenge to the toxic standard that has dominated our politics for years. Civil rights leaders echoed that sentiment, noting that the post wasn't just offensive, but representative of the kind of behavior that had long gone unchecked, particularly when it came to how black women in power are treated. Several of Crockett's colleagues on Capitol Hill came forward to support her. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus stood behind her during a press conference, where they emphasized that this wasn't merely a personal matter, it was a workplace issue. What happens online doesn't stay online, said one representative. When someone uses their platform to spread hate and incite attacks, especially against women of color, it impacts our safety, our families, and our ability to serve. But not everyone was on board. Prominent conservative voices quickly pushed back, accusing Crockett of attempting to cancel political speech. On talk radio and right-leaning news sites, the narrative flipped. They argued that Trump had simply been engaging in his usual style of political mockery, a blend of brash commentary and over-the-top memes that, according to his defenders, had become part of his brand. One conservative commentator said flatly, "This is what Trump does. Everyone knows it. He insults people. It's crude, yes, but it's not illegal." Others went further, accusing Crockett of weaponizing the court system to silence a political opponent. Some lawmakers even suggested she was using the lawsuit to boost her national profile, potentially paving the way for future political ambitions. Asterisk still. Legal experts watching the situation were more measured in their assessments. They pointed out that while defamation suits involving public figures are notoriously difficult to win, thanks to the high bar of proving actual malice, this particular case might be different. The post wasn't just critical or mocking, they said. It contained specific visual and textual elements that could reasonably be interpreted as defamatory or inciting. Asterisk one legal analyst on a Sunday morning panel noted, "There's a difference between harsh political critique and something that rises to the level of targeted defamation. If Crockett's team can prove that the post was designed to cause reputational harm or provoke harassment, that changes the calculus entirely." Asterisk meanwhile, the lawsuit also drew the attention of advocacy groups focused on online safety and digital harassment. Organizations like the Center for Democracy and Technology released statements highlighting the real-world impact of viral online attacks, particularly when they're aimed at women and minorities in public service. "This case is a wake-up call," one spokesperson said. "It's about what kind of country we want to be, where leaders can disagree respectfully, or where they use platforms to target and endanger each other." Asterisk interestingly, even some of Trump's former allies expressed discomfort with the content of the original post. While they stopped short of endorsing the lawsuit, a few Republican strategists privately admitted that the messaging had crossed a line. "You want your candidate to be tough," one said, "but there's tough, and then there's reckless." Asterisk for Jasmine Crockett, the reactions didn't seem to deter her. If anything, they reinforced her central argument that certain types of behavior, no matter how common in politics, shouldn't be tolerated simply because they've become normalized. She continued to frame the case not as a partisan attack, but as a demand for a baseline level of decency. As public opinion remained sharply divided, one thing was clear: the legal battle had quickly evolved into a broader cultural moment. It was no longer just about one post or one lawsuit hit. It was about the standards society sets for public dialogue and the consequences, if any, for those who refuse to follow them. Asterisk. The lawsuit filed by Jasmine Crockett did more than just respond to a single post. It sparked a much deeper conversation about where the boundaries lie between political speech and personal defamation. In an era where public figures regularly trade jabs on social media, and where a single post can reach millions in seconds, the case against Donald Trump raised a fundamental question: how far is too far? Asterisk. For years, Trump has operated in a political landscape where aggressive language and personal attacks have become part of the norm. His supporters often defend his style as brutally honest or refreshingly unfiltered. Critics, however, argue that this form of communication has eroded public trust and decency in political discourse. Crockett's lawsuit dropped into that tension like a lightning bolt, forcing people across the spectrum to confront the cost of letting inflammatory rhetoric go unchecked. Asterisk. Legal scholars immediately began debating the broader implications. On one hand, political figures are expected to withstand a certain level of criticism. It comes with the territory. The U.S. legal system has long protected robust political speech, especially under the First Amendment. Courts have consistently ruled that public figures must meet a high standard, proving actual malice to succeed in defamation cases. That standard exists to avoid stifling debate and to ensure that political disagreement doesn't get dragged into courtrooms every time someone feels insulted. Asterisk. But Crockett's lawsuit aimed to draw a distinction between legitimate political discourse and something far more damaging. Her legal team argued that Trump's post didn't just criticize her policies or record it, attacked her personally in a way designed to inflame, provoke, and ultimately endanger. The post's racially charged content, combined with the visual mockery, wasn't policy-based disagreement. It was, in their words, a personalized assault meant to demean and dehumanize. Asterisk. This distinction is critical. The law recognizes that free speech isn't unlimited. There are exceptions: defamation, incitement to violence, and targeted harassment among them. Crockett's argument rested on the idea that Trump's post wasn't a comment about governance, but a deliberate attempt to weaponize his platform against her in a way that triggered real-world consequences. Asterisk. Supporters of Crockett say this case could serve as a turning point. They argue that too many politicians, activists, and journalists, especially women of color, have been subject to online attacks that escalate into harassment, threats, or worse. Many point to the fact that these attacks often begin with a post from someone with a large platform, and then spread through coordinated campaigns, memes, and trolls. For those who live through it, it's not just unpleasant, it can be life-altering. Asterisk. That's why advocacy groups have been closely watching the case. Organizations focused on online safety, digital abuse, and racial justice have pointed out that the lawsuit challenges a dangerous status quo. This isn't about shutting down speech, one digital rights expert explained. It's about holding people accountable when they knowingly use their platforms to put others at risk. Asterisk. Even outside of legal circles, the conversation took hold on social media. Hashtag supporting Crockett trended for days. Public opinion, while divided, reflected growing frustration with the lack of accountability online. Some users shared their own experiences of being targeted or threatened. After going viral, others questioned why political leaders are allowed to behave in ways that would get an average person suspended or even sued. Meanwhile, Trump's defenders clung tightly to the free speech argument. They insisted that Crockett, as an elected official, should be able to handle tough criticism. But even some of them acknowledged privately that this case touched on more than just feelings. The fact that Crockett had received death threats after the post went live, some directly quoting language from the post added weight to her claims. In the courtroom. The outcome of the case remains uncertain, but in the court of public opinion, it's already having an impact. People are asking harder questions about accountability, ethics, and the role of digital platforms in political life. Crockett's lawsuit may not redefine the First Amendment, but it's forcing a reckoning over how we use speech and what happens when that speech is used as a weapon. As the lawsuit between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and former President Donald Trump moves forward, it has already made an unmistakable mark on the national conversation. This is no longer just about one offensive post or a single moment of viral outrage. It has become a reflection of a much larger dilemma in modern American politics: how we balance free expression with personal accountability, especially when the stakes involve public safety, racial dignity, and the abuse of powerful platforms. Decision to file a $100 million defamation suit wasn't born out of political theatrics. It came from a place of principle, rooted in her belief that elected officials, no matter how public their lives may be, still deserve basic respect, fairness, and protection under the law. Her actions reflect the growing need to draw a line in today's chaotic digital environment, where insults masquerade as political speech and viral mockery can have very real, very dangerous consequences. What makes this case especially impactful is not just the legal question of whether defamation occurred, but the cultural reckoning it has prompted. Americans are now grappling with what kind of discourse they are willing to accept from their leaders. The lawsuit has forced both sides of the political spectrum to consider whether words, especially from someone as influential as a former president, can and should be challenged when they inflict damage that goes far beyond a typical partisan jab. Trump's single quotes as supporters argue that he's simply engaging in his well-known rhetorical stuma, unfiltered, and often controversial. But the fact that this style has repeatedly targeted women of color in politics raises legitimate concerns about racial and gender bias in political communication. Crockett's stand brings those issues to the forefront in a very public and very legal way. Whether or not the court rules in her favor, Crockett has already shifted the ground beneath the conversation. Her lawsuit has created space for other public figures, particularly those from historically marginalized communities, to push back against online abuse, misinformation, and dangerous character attacks that previously went unanswered. It shows that even in a political environment dominated by outrage, there is still room for accountability. In the long run, the outcome of this case may influence more than just Trump's social media habits. It could shape how political discourse is treated in courtrooms, classrooms, and digital platforms across the country. It may even serve as a benchmark for future lawsuits brought by public officials who face harassment disguised as political banter. Jasmine Crockett's fight is not just a personal one. It represents a broader struggle to reclaim dignity, restore truth, and reinforce that in a democracy, power must come with responsibility. As the legal process continues, the country watches not just for the verdict, but for the message it sends about the kind of public square we want to preserve and the voices we choose to